For somebody who maybe is intimidated, right, tracking your behavior, tracking data, they say, how do I do that, Dr. Kashey? Where do I start? What would be the simplest place you would start to recommend? I know you got some great tricks. Where would you recommend somebody start to look at their behavior, and how should they track it?
Interesting question. Oh, you can go as simple as pen and paper and a brief description. I like to do that the most. I still default to that under many situations, so I'll let you in on the secret trick that I use, that I invoke the power of NASA. In other words, I care very little how you measure. How you do it matters less to me than the process you develop to do it. So like the efficacious muscle building exercise, let us devise an efficacious, self-monitoring system, so to speak. Paying attention, or in other words, how do I pay attention to what I do? And to me, that we have 4 criteria for that as well, or I do, and you can choose to adopt them or not. And they spell the word NASA. It means, can you measure it now? Can you keep track of it right now? If I have a pen and paper on me, which I have some right over there, can I do it at a moment's notice? Yes. You can use your phone, although your phone gets used for a bunch of stuff. I prefer unitaskers. So can you measure it right now? Can you measure it with some degree of accuracy? In other words, does the thing you write down match the thing that happened? Does it match reality? And can you make it simple? In other words, can you do it on a daily basis? So I can keep a pen and paper with me at all times in some shape or form, okay? And I can whip it out at any time to write something down. And very few times have I ever gotten people insulted when they say, hey, can I take a note for a second? Like, I think exactly 0 times in my life has somebody gotten insulted when I said I wanted to take notes. Does that mean they have to know what I take notes on? Absolutely not. So we have, can you do it right now? Can we do it with some degree of accuracy? Can we make it simple? Like, can we make it part of our daily ritual? And can we make it accessible? In other words, when you go back and look at what you wrote down, does it make sense to you? If you use numbers in some way, like if I want to track how many times I bite my nails, that might mean I pull out my notepad and just write a check mark. And I know this, I only use this notepad to check off how many times I bit my nails. I have all sorts of counting apparatus. Actually, I have one right here. This actually, just maybe you can see it. Every time I push this button, the number goes up. You can count all sorts of stuff. I love counting things, especially when it helps you out. I have counting apparatus pretty much everywhere. We all got timers in the kitchen. We all have, we use our fingers. I think we measure more often than we would guess. It just so happens that when we make the face noise measure, people have pictures of instruments and other crazy apparatus that cause hassle in our lives. But really, you can measure with any number of things because it just means a tool that you use to compare to a standard. So if you know, for instance, you bite your nails 5 times a day, how would you know? Because you made tick marks that maybe some days you bit your nails 38 times and it just so happened you got in an argument that day. So then you can correlate loosely arguments with nail biting. And that gives you somewhere that you can focus. So really, can you measure it now? Can you measure it accurately? Can you measure it simply? And can you make that data accessible? And to round out the accessible part, it really means to me, can you make it into a picture? So if I make 5 tick marks and I have 5 tick marks a day, whatever, you can start making a graph to see that number go up and down. That makes numerical measurements, in my opinion, a little more useful because you can see the change in a much clearer way, and you can see that change over time. And if we discuss eating more or less, well, eating more or less what? You can make it more or less burgers or more or less calories. That just changes the resolution of the measurements rather than measuring or not. And I just take the position that if we have tools that we can use now accurately, simply, and accessibly that have a high degree of accuracy, well then may as well, because it gives us more ways to inform our decisions after. But really, you can start with the pen and paper. You can use paper clips in a jar. You can use, I actually like this idea that introduced to me from a book in the 70s where somebody tracked a behavior. They had a piece of paper that they carried around and they just tore a little notch in it whenever they used a word or whatever that they wanted to track. And then at the end of the day, you just count up the number of times you tore the paper, and then every day you can track that number and see it going up or down. And then if the number goes down or up, then you can look at the times that you took the measurement and say, well, what in my environment, or what did I tell myself, or how did other people, what happened during the time I did this thing? And it gives you an opportunity to then engineer your environment. So hopefully that makes sense, that measurement tends to freak people out because whenever they measure something, they feel bad about it. But really, you measure whether you want to or not. You just measure with varying degrees of reliability and accuracy. Every time you look in the mirror, you measure. Every time you look at a plate, you measure. You measure in comparison with what other people look like. You measure with how good your clothes feel. You measure with how much food takes up the space on the plate. Like really, it just means comparing to something else. You might as well make useful comparisons rather than accidental ones, because the measurement will occur whether you want it to or not, because you use it to discriminate on a daily basis how you make your decisions. You might measure, I've eaten too much because you feel sick after you ate it, when really you could use another baseline to determine whether you've eaten enough or not.
So essentially, a measurement is some form of comparison, and it is your view that you might as well make the most accurate one.
So long as it fits within the constraints of NASA, yes. Like, do I want to go get dual absorption X-ray spectroscopy on myself? No. But like, I can see abs, so okay, I've measured my body fat accurately enough for me. So yes, to your point that from the incorporating this into a daily thing matters quite a bit, and that the data that you get from it does match. Does the thing you measure actually reflect the thing that you want to measure?
You also mentioned daily in there. Is it, do you think, critical in terms of shaping behavior for the time scale of the things we measure to be to the frequency of daily?
Well, in the context of the question, we eat every day. So it would then follow we have a method of measuring on a daily basis.
So per occurrence, there needs to be an opportunity to measure it.
Yes, and if the occurrences happen at random, you still want to have the ability to measure when it does happen. And that makes the now part important. That you can, so long as you can mark down when something happens and the situation it happens in an accurate enough way and in an accessible way, you can store it somewhere else and then compile all of that information at a later date and inform more long-term decisions that way. Can I jump into an X-ray machine now? No, I have to set an appointment, I have to go, I have travel time, and by the time I take the measurement, the context of what I want to measure has already changed.
So is now in context to the occurrence of the behavior?
Can I measure the behavior when it happens?
So for it to be as effective as possible, you want to be able to measure as closely to when it happened.
Correct. Okay. And then that will help timestamp in your brain and on whatever measurement apparatus you use, the context that the behavior occurs in. If you recognize that you overeat and you write down exactly when you overeat, that will, one, give you the context that you did overeat and also help you remember for the next time.
Aha, okay, so it informs learning better.
Yeah, so you start conditioning this measurement that you take with the environment that the measurement occurs. And if this works especially well with I would say more typical behaviors, I'll use myself as an example, like cursing. So every time I cursed, I would mark it down. And by marking it down, I would also remember like the context that I did end up cursing. And then I start to remember too that like if I feel like I will curse any moment, then I also have to prepare myself with a way to measure it. And so it also works as like a way to manage my behavior in real time, because I want to keep my cursing number low, and I know that when I curse I measure it, and if I want to avoid measuring it I will curse less. And so it also works as a way to manage my behavior as well, which some people might call observer effects, or the fact that you will measure something or that something will get measured will also change the nature of the behavior in some way. That just by virtue of measuring, you will probably end up behaving in a way more beneficial to you than before. So does this throw off the accuracy of the measurement? Kind of. The measurements can still say accurate. It does, however, change the conditions in which you do the thing. So by introducing a self-monitoring system, it fails as a scientific intervention. In other words, does it measure exactly what happens? No, but who cares about that? I care that you get better. So the introduction of the self-monitoring system allows you to keep track of what you do when you do it, so then you could decide, do I want to do this or not?
Pretty extraordinary, because you essentially have these positive feedback loops, right? Where if I hear you correctly, misbehaving, quote unquote, is a result of acting on emotional disturbance or emotional whim. And so if you introduce a system of rationality by which to measure...
I can make it a little more diplomatic than that. You have behaviors that you want to do more of and behaviors you want to do less of. And then when an event happens that deviates from your normal day-to-day, that gives you an idea of, well, how does my behavior change collateral to this event that differs from my day-to-day? And it could mean something good happens, right? If something good happens and then you change your behavior from what you do normally, we tend to call that celebrating, okay? If something deviates from the norm and then we tend to act sad and do sad people things, we might call that something like a commiserating or whatever, griefing, sure. And we have a different set of behaviors or the same set of behaviors under those circumstances where an event happens outside of the norm. Holidays, one of them. Now, we consider holidays normal because they happen every year, but in the but like from a learning standpoint, if it happens every year, it may as well happen 0 times. And so when you look at how you behave on a daily basis, and then maybe something happens once every 10 days, even that starts to really stretch out, like this gets sort of divorced from turning into something that we might call routine. So say measuring what you eat in whatever way you would like to on a day-to-day basis, keeping track of what you eat and how much, keeping track of how much you sleep on a daily basis, and some days you will eat more and some days you will eat less, and often the days that you eat more or less you can correlate to events that happened that day. And so you might notice that on a day where you had an argument with someone you love, or you had a bad day at work or a birthday, you might eat more or you might eat less. And that gives you an idea of, okay, what can I do to prepare for this ahead of time? How can I communicate with the other people involved to help make this a healthier situation for everyone? And that probably gives you the best idea of how to figure out where to start. Figure out your current position if you want to figure out how to get to the next one.
If you're picking up what I'm putting down and want to learn more about cognitive nutrition so you can finally live the life you deserve, then learn about my Kickstart program by clicking the link in the description box below.